Good morning, everyone, ladies and gentlemen, guests, and fellow design enthusiasts. It's an absolute pleasure to welcome you to this captivating session today. We'll be delivering into the realm of emerging trends in design and architecture. My name is Noura Dawar. I have the privilege of serving as your moderator today. I'm from Studio D04. As the creative director and founder of the studio, I have a profound passion for design innovation and an unwavering commitment to marrying aesthetics and functionality. So I'm personally very excited for this talk, and I would like to personally introduce Abir Tahlak. As part of the responsibilities of her current position, Abir supports the vision and agenda set in the UAE government to make the UAE the most innovative nation. Within both her roles as director of Mohammed bin Rashid Center for Government Innovation and Director of Possibilities at the Ministry of Possibilities, where he supports the Deputy Minister of Cabinet Affairs for Strategic Affairs of the UAE in leading and managing the operations and the teams within both organizations. Abir was involved in both the setup and design of Mohammed bin Rashid Center for Government Innovation and the Ministry of Possibilities, where both have a mandate to stimulate and enrich the culture of innovation and introduce the platforms within the government sector that activates, implements, and tests new concepts for the next generation of governments. On a personal level, Abir Tahlak was a founding member of Tinka, a multidisciplinary design firm which focuses on design communication, experiential design, in addition to creating experimental expressions and items working hand in hand with artisans through the foundry. Abir holds a bachelor's degree in visual communication design from American University of Sharjah, where she graduated with honors. She's also an alumnus of the Public Sector Innovation Diploma offered under the Mohammed bin Rashid Center for Government Innovation in partnership with Imperial College of London, and the Behavioral Economics Program under the Ministry of Interior in partnership with the University of Chicago, both School of Business. So if Abir, you would like to share a few words to introduce everything.
Thank you, Noura, for this introduction. Good morning, everyone, ladies and gentlemen. We extend a warm welcome to this session on emerging trends in design and architecture, hosted by the Mohammed bin Rashid Center for Government Innovation. Today, we embark on an exploration through this conversation of the future of housing, with a focus on House of the Future competition, this initiatives that supports our aim here at the UAE government and at the center to find impactful possibilities and solutions that will redefine how we envision and experience our homes and our personal spaces. As you all hopefully are aware, the House of Future competition also aims to inspire and challenge architects, designers, engineers to think beyond the traditional boundaries and envision a new era of housing that captures the essence of modern Emirati living. The competition is under the patronage of His Highness Sheikh Hamdan bin Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum, Crown Prince of Dubai and Chairman of the Executive Council, in partnership with the Mohammed bin Rashid Housing Establishment, Zaha Hadid Architects, Santiago Calatrava Architects and Engineers, and of course operated by Bildner. The competition is still open to submissions till end of this month. Winners of this competition will receive a total of 1 million dirhams in prize money. And you may already know that Dubai is home to a number of some of 3D printed buildings, where a decree was issued back in 2021 for using 3D printing technology in construction. And recently, Dubai municipality has also licensed the city's first 3D printed villa to be expected to be completed in October 2023. Just wanted to shed light of some of the things going around here in Dubai and specifically the UAE, where even just next to me, where we're just sitting here, back in May 2016, the world's first 3D printed office officially opened near Emirates Towers 2, serving as a office space for the Dubai Future Foundation. As I recall, the building took around 17 days to print and was installed on site within 2 days. So possibilities, opportunities, and thinking of different ways to serve the modern Emirati family moving forward. So together, let's enjoy this conversation today, moderated by Noura, and thank you, our speakers, to be with us and explore some exciting possibilities together. Thank you.
Thank you for the kind words. So joining us today are two luminaries whose expertise and contributions have left remarkable mark on the global design scene. First, we have Andrew Mason, the Director of Contracts from Calatrava International in the UAE. Andrew Mason's career has been dedicated to the fusion of architectural mastery and visionary innovation, making profound impact in the built environment. He specializes in complex transactions, family office, and government mega projects. Previously head of project finance at National Projects Office, UAE, and worked on projects such as UAE Pavilion, Expo, and Founders Memorial. Welcome, Andrew.
Good morning. Thank you very much. It's a very kind introduction. It's a great pleasure to be here. It's a great pleasure to be talking to the panel, my colleagues, and of course, all those listening. What I think we'll be talking about today is at the heart, I suspect, of all good designers, and particularly when we're looking at the type of questions that are relevant to the industry now. It's a very important time. It's also a time of enablement, and given the vision and commitment that the UAE has to innovation, technology, entrepreneurship, growth, certainty, it's a wonderful time to take on this type of competition. So we are truly honoured to be a part of it, and delighted to assist in any way we can. It's always a pleasure to talk about what may be coming and to have some sight on what is alongside our colleagues and our friends in government. So yeah, very exciting. Looking very much forward to the discussion. And I should say I'm also excited because by profession I am not a designer, which is even more interesting. So I come at this from a construction and real estate background. So I have a warm passion for design and architecture. But sometimes it's useful to see these things sometimes through separate eyes. So I'm afforded that privilege, principally just by not being an architect by profession. So that's a special one for me. But thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. And our second distinguished guest is Christina Seilern, the visionary force behind Studio Seilern Architects, a London-based architectural practice renowned for its unwavering commitment to design excellence and pushing the boundaries of creativity. Christina is an expert in the architectural design of successful performance art venues and cultural centers, a process of discovery that started with the design of The Curve in Leicester, an innovative building that turned the spatial idea of a performance venue inside out. She has since then built a trust network of theater specialists that she works with regularly, from theater directors, renowned conductors, to the world's most advanced acousticians. Her portfolio has expanded within the last year by 3 recently completed buildings. The ambitious Ghana Conference of Cultural Center in Egypt will bring a new performing arts center to the Red Sea region. Ghana Plaza, the first phase of the project, opened in 2021 and has been used for a range of cultural and sporting events, including the Ghana Film Festival. The re-imaging and refurbishment of Buksa Skivas, a historic city block in Vilnius, is now complete after a design and construction process that has taken over 10 years. And finally, Paris House is a private island villa in the Aegean, a sensitive hybrid of modernist design and traditional materiality. So prior to establishing Studio Seilern Architects, Christina was a founder director of Raphael Vinodin Architects, RVA London Studio, was responsible for their award-winning European portfolio for over 10 years and led a number of high-profile cultural, educational, and commercial projects, both in the public and private sectors, such as the 20 Fenchurch St. Office Tower in London, First Sight Gallery in Colchester, Mahler 4 Towers in Amsterdam, and the Louis Siegler Institute of Integrative Genomics at Princeton University. Christina prides herself in the successful production of exciting new spaces, buildings, and extraordinary locations that are sensitively sustainable while fussing significant contribution to the cultural and economic diversity of their place. She talks about the design issues surrounding the work of the studio as a frequent panelist and guest speaker, both in the UK and abroad. She's also a regular juror for the ARMIPIM Award, World Architecture Festival, and PAD London. Thank you, Christina.
Wow, thank you so much. It's always interesting to hear somebody talk about your work. I feel exhausted. It seems that we've done a lot. Thank you very much for inviting me to this panel. I think it's a very interesting subject that is very important, and it forced me to do a little bit of reading around it just to sort of get my mind ready for the conversation. But what is very interesting to me, at least, is this idea that through mass customization or through modular design, but also very importantly through this idea that we are working internationally and talking internationally in a way that we never had before. Certain ideas of contextualization and contextualism and anti-globalization are coming upon us in a very strong manner. So I think that the fact that we have an office in London, we have an office in New York, but we work all over the world, where I would say a medium-sized studio. But the thing that is at the core of our work is really always understanding the places and the places we work in, and especially the responsibility that comes along with it. So I think that this debate that you are doing today is one which is very important. And actually, it's not, this idea of modular design is not one that's new. It can be traced back to the 16th or the 17th century. But it's one that is ongoing and is, I think, definitely changing quite rapidly. So I'm excited to be part of this panel. Thank you.
Thank you. So without further ado, thank you for introducing the topic. So today we will be talking about the trends of architecture and design, and one of the most recent, I think, prominent trends that you just talked about is the modular. So if we want to ask more about it, so emerging trends are known for reshaping traditional norms. You talked about that they already were there before. So have you also explored this idea of modular? It's a trend that's happening that people want to kind of plug in something existing overall around similar things. How do we not lose the sense of architecture, customization, the human-centric feel to architecture while we go into this trend of modular innovations?
But it seems that modular design has always come out of necessity, and actually, when Great Britain's colonization led to the advent of building components being manufactured in England and then shipped worldwide, and that was it was basically because of a challenge faced by the lack of adequate tools and materials in the distant colonies. So it's sort of that was the beginning of it. And so there was a famous sort of it was called the Manning Portable Colonial Cottage, and these elements were prefabricated and taken abroad. Now this is very let's say this is very sort of divisionary, because in a sense this completely ignored the idea of integrating within a place, and it kind of moved away from using local craftsmanship and using local knowledge, and essentially sort of was quite an aggressive way of looking at modular design. But these are the sources. And then if you look at the history as well, the Industrial Revolution completely changed the way we were building buildings, and so it allowed us to have new forms of manufacturing, like iron, and the Crystal Palace, for example, were examples of being able to do much more lightweight, buildable, assemblable building structures. So that's a little bit the history of it. But it's, in a sense, it's never really, modular architecture never really took off because at a very large scale, because it had these sort of social cultural challenges. It was that you were doing mass production. It's a little bit like if you think of a car sort of on the line and being repeated, and there was an issue with that in terms of we as humans want to have our own space, and we don't want to live in a car. We want to live in a home, and there is sort of this customization moment that needs to happen. And at the time, through this mass fabrication or this sort of prefabrication, these components being fabricated and assembled, it sort of it lacked this. It just had this singular design component, and then, as I was mentioning, this lack of contextualism. So that essentially you prefabricated and imported and sort of put in the space, and that was all problematic, and in a sense, I think has never really enabled it to take on a mass scale. And now we're moving towards something which is quite different, because this modular architecture is starting to move towards a mass customization, and where we are able to design complex structures on the computer, and we're able to resolve it on the computer. And if you see some of these early, what I call blob architecture, these sort of early complex buildings that were built, and you go and see them, they're incredibly poorly detailed. And that's a question of, the construction industry not being able to follow the advancements of computer technology. And even though we have BIM and sort of these other computer-aided design tools, the fabrication process following it wasn't quite able to follow up with it. So you have these early examples of complex geometrical buildings that just in terms of detailing start to fall apart. And that's where I think things like mass customization, 3D printing, and these sort of new tools that are enabling us to move forward will help. And I think it's still very much at its infancy. When we were doing Guna, the concert hall in Egypt on the Red Sea, when we first started looking at it, we wanted to 3D print it. And we have these 150 columns which are 20 meters tall, and we just thought it would be great that we just install a robotic arm and it just goes and prints all of these 3D prints all of these columns, just like we had done prototyping in the office. But the quality and the technology weren't quite there yet, and I think it's still very much at its infancy. But there is definitely a movement that sort of allows a completely new way of working. And if you look at other design industries, the car, the phone, as being prime ones. I mean, I read once that a typical car will have 10 times more lines of coding than Facebook does. So these are the way cars were designed, is they started employing coders as well as industrial designers as well as engineers in order to design these cars. And if you think about the car, how it has evolved, it's sort of become, you're basically driving in a huge iPhone. And same with communication technology and the phone, whereas the construction industry really hasn't evolved that much since the 40s or the 50s. We're still building with steel and pouring concrete and using sort of very basic technology. And while BIM has changed the way we think about coordination, and we can see the problems before we go on site, it's still very much the tools that are at our use are very backwards. And this has to do with the fact that our construction industry is very fragmented. So you have the steel and you have the concrete and you have the people making the cabinets and all of that. And these are all much smaller industries that don't have the funding to really innovate in a way that a car industry has, which brings all these components and then replicates them millions of times. Or the investment in innovation is worth it because you're just doing one small piece that you're going to replicate so many times. Whereas in a building technology, every building is bespoke, and so the innovation cost is very difficult. So I think we're there. We're at the very, very beginning of it, but I think that we are so far behind other design industries.
Thank you. That's a very interesting eyesight of looking at it, because I never thought of it as, like architects have like maybe putting a boundary, like the multidisciplinary aspect of it, letting someone feed back to it. Maybe we're not used to that as architects. So I think it would be nice to know like Andrew's point of view as he is outside, like looking into the architect world. Like, what is your point of view into the modular systems, and how can we expand on that and benefit?
Yeah, thank you. So, I mean, Christina has beautifully put the context of it all, which is perfect, almost like a little mini lecture. And we are far behind. And you know, if you continue the research, say, into consultancy, then you'll find that most of the larger consultancy practices talk about the importance for circular economics, for the ability for countries to be able to produce and promote and rely upon local materials, not only just to support perhaps the modular aspect of the use of local materials in modular or in any other design, but also to promote efficiency and time and cost, etc. And I think that's incredibly important, and particularly in the UAE as well. I mean, we know that is, in some respects, an emerging industry. There's been a lot of great work done with local materials. But I think there is this outstanding opportunity economically to be able to promote as far as possible the innovation and the materials that are here to promote modularity and to promote design in general. I mean, that comes into possibly our discussions later on the preservation of cultural and, you know, historic issues, you know, the preservation of all of these things, which from a personal perspective, I think is vitally important. And of course, it also assists greatly when the design process starts and develops through its entire process. It's very interesting what Christine is saying. You know, some of the projects that perhaps we undertake at Calatrava have slightly more of a unique basis, you know, such as bridges and towers, etc., or the UAE pavilion. So modularity is an important part of the design process, but I think it has to be tempered against what can and what cannot be done. And I also agree. I think we're at the early stages of this. You know, in the context of time, it will take a little more to develop probably where we want to go. But it's certainly beautiful context for the research of it and the history of it. It's very exciting. But of course, I'm interested in the circular economics. We want to see more local produce. We want to see more local manufacturers. We want to see the promotion of whatever we can within the country and within the region. And that, for me personally, is a very important part of this competition, because you got to remember that Christina pointed out the responsibility of designers, which is crucial, absolutely crucial. But at the same time, there is a certainty in the UAE, which I think benefits this type of opportunity for designers that have entered or are considering entering, because the vision of government in the UAE provides certainty. It's not necessarily a design competition that is looking for an idea to promote or blend or develop. It's looking for a natural resolution, something that can be built upon in the certainty of an economic framework. So it's a very powerful competition. It has huge responsibility, even on the entrance. And I think that's a very noble responsibility to be able to provide to all those that contribute, because we will be seeing, I'm sure, very exciting designs that not only look after where our visions may go for the house of the future, but will also concentrate on local materials, what can be done within the region, and obviously are going to benefit from the historical setting of modularity, as Christina beautifully pointed out. So, yeah, interesting times. Let's see how that one develops.
Thank you for the words. So moving into, you were saying that as like Calatrava, they are more into like the special, like not modular systems. So this is my question, like if we're going towards trends, architectural trends, how do the architectural narratives, the story that the buildings tell with the evolving trends change? Is it shifting? Are we seeing architecture narratives in the face of modular design, innovative materials, technological advancements? How do these elements contribute to the story a building tells?
Well, that's a great question to ask, and there's probably multiple strands to that particular question. I mean, a lot of the real estate that we see on our skylines is obviously down to the principle of its use per se, first of all, and based upon its use, you know, the design process kicks in from that respect, whether it's modularity that is required or whether it's a uniqueness required by a tower or something iconic. So there's probably a mix, but I think if we're to look at the competition per se and the use, or not so much the use, but where urban landscape is going and where cities are going, then I think it becomes incredibly interesting, because I mean, I'm no dissimilar to any other person. Now we're looking for, or we're expecting to have a space for our homes that is flexible, is multi-use, has our ability to look at what the prospects might be for harvesting energy. There's much more in the public domain about the importance of well-being. I don't just mean personal well-being, I mean the well-being of buildings as well. And Christina, I'm sure will have some wonderful insights on that too. There's a lot of components which I think are important now. And I think it's a wonderful time to do it, because we get the opportunity to look at, as designers, sustainability, net carbon, local materials, the requirements for people to have space. Then we have the chance to look at, well, how do people wish to live and where do they wish to live? You know, and historically, when suburbs were constructed in you know, multiple countries outside of the city centre, in effect, that's a trend that partially is changing, and there needs to be, and there is a requirement for people who wish to live in the city, in which case, how does that look? And what is it that people require? And therefore, what responsibility goes upon the designers to create that space? Now, in my own view, modularity becomes part of that, obviously. The use of residential space to create the needs of a real estate investment require modularity generally. But I think it's wonderful to see some of the innovations that are being made with respect to green space, ecosystems, you know, these things that are coming into inner city urban lifestyles. So I think there's a multiple amount of strands. And when you see some of the designs that are in our larger cities, I think it's wonderful to see some of it. I think there is far more connection to the landscape, to climate, and to you know, the needs of the people. And as a closing point, I would say that doesn't just mean you know, a residential owner. I think that also means commercial owners as well. You know, we went from open spaces to closed boxes back to open spaces, and now we're somewhere in the middle. So, you know, personally, I like to work from home, but you know, people's brains work in a different way, and that again sinks back into well-being, and then, of course, beautifully, that sinks back to the well-being or the design for particular buildings, and that itself is a wonderfully interesting field of research as to whether healthy buildings, you know, are constructed and designed for the right reasons or not. I think we're very lucky in the UAE, and I say this as an outsider, of course, that we have a quite remarkable skyline. I mean, it's beautiful to consider what has been achieved inside one generation in Abu Dhabi and the same in Dubai. Just to choose, you know, two of the Emirates. This is an incredible array of architecture. It's a vast collaboration of design, excellence, constructed in a relatively small space with a certainty of outcome. So that is quite remarkable. I've never seen anything like it. I sometimes say to people, when you live in Dubai and you've got the opportunity to work in the UAE, it's like being part of history unfolding. It's not being, just in somewhere in the world for working. Everybody is contributing, and I think that's such a nice part of the strands of that question, because all of these avenues require to be pulled together. And I think it's a wonderful thing that this competition is promoting this house of the future at its very basic level. 4 words, house of the future. It sounds simple, but I think when we discuss it, it has very significant ramifications. I think a lot of people watch where the United Arab Emirates is in the world of design. It's an arena unlike any other that I've personally experienced. So I think all of these things together make the here and the now very special, for sure. I'm interested in Christine's comments.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think what's, at least for me personally, interesting, having been working in the UAE and Saudi for the past 10, 15 years, and this notion of contextualism, which I think is so important, and all thinking, why would I be here? What can I contribute? And what is it that's so different? And I think that coming from an outsider with a perspective in a place, what I think is the most extraordinary thing is if you look at Dubai, for example, which is a city that was essentially built in a generation, and it's absolutely extraordinary. And that comes with successes and some failures, of course, but it's it is the speed and the ambition at which in Europe, for example, we haven't had, or even in America, we haven't had for a while, simply because we are dealing with a very different kind of context. We're dealing with ancient cities, ancient city centers, and how do we sort of integrate within this fabric? And if you look at Rome, for example, Rome only has one modern building at its historical core. Otherwise, it's all historical buildings. And then you had around these cities, you had these new cities, these sort of tabula rasa, sort of Corbusier-like cities forming around in a very structured zoning parameter, where if you look at, for example, La Défense in Paris, which was essentially an office complex down on the outskirts, the historical perimeter of Paris, they were really struggling because after 6 p.m. it was a ghost city, and they're sort of trying to now reweave and rethink the whole process. And so what is interesting about working in the UAE, and I think the whole Middle East region, is that there are so many opportunities to start afresh. And I think that this idea of not just looking at the house, the individual house of the future, but also the context of living is just as important. And there was what was her name? A mayor in Barcelona called, yes, Ada Colau. She was very interesting because she was struggling with the inner city center of Barcelona being absolutely congested. And the premise was that cities were designed for transport and interchange networks and the cars. And therefore it became a grid. Barcelona is a gridded city with the diagonal sort of breaking it, but it became a grid of car networks. And she started thinking of hyperblocks, where essentially, rather than zoning and saying this is the industrial zone, this is a housing zone, you kind of take these hyperblocks and you allow them to organically be sort of like a plug-in, plug-out. You allow them to sort of change over time, and so that it's sort of neighborhoods form naturally and locally. And then she took out the cars and essentially sort of allowed the cars to go at the perimeter of these hyperblocks of these areas and replace the cars with parks. And just by putting bollards and playgrounds and cycle lanes and places for the elderly to come and sit, and for the mothers to come with their children, etc. Sort of giving back the city to the individuals, and sort of extending this notion that you've got the car and you've got the house, and these are sort of two separate boundaries, and actually allowing the spaces around to become part of that. And I thought that was a very interesting idea in terms of living in the future. You know, are we going in a way where we're all going to be living in a line, or we're all going to be living in a square or in a circle, or is that the future of urban technology, or are we going to be looking at it at a much more granular level in terms of what happens with the home, but what happens around the perimeter of the home? And that becomes challenging when you're talking about the housing needs, because the mass housing requirements means that you have to sort of produce a certain amount of housing, and yet you want to equalize, I think, the outdoor space and the housing itself just as much. So I think in terms of building new cities and the opportunities that you have in the Middle East generally, there's a huge amount of thinking that can come out of it, learning from what has been done and how cities have evolved from abroad, and then coming here and rethinking it from scratch. So that's why a lot of the architectural press is currently there's an enormous amount coming out of the Middle East and China and places like that, because this is where the innovation is really happening, because this is where new cities are forming. So
I think it's like with two sides, like it's the massive potential and the massive challenge and the massive responsibility that comes with it as well. So I think that's where we've, even especially as like small boutique studios, like anything we put out there, it's new construction. So is that the answer? Or I think there's the aspect you touched upon that is really important in trending. Like you work in Europe with a lot of like old structures, old buildings that you can like just enhance somehow, and it takes much longer than like construction here. But I think that's a good aspect to explore here as well. Like, how do we use what we have already instead of expanding horizontally? How do we fix what we have originally and learn from like abroad? I think that is a very important aspect of like future of urban living and how we are redefining the way we live here. I think somewhere along the line, maybe the human aspect was lost, and now we're trying to grab it back in. That's how it feels like as well. Yeah.
Well, I think this concept of the tabula rasa and Corbusier. I mean, Corbusier is so revered in our industry, and I think there were so many complex ideas in there, but complex in sort of maybe not in a good way. This idea that you can just erase the past and move forward from scratch, or to be radical for the sense of being radical rather than sensitive and innovative. And I think that there is I think this idea, you build a lot faster than we do here, simply because you have this hunger for building and this need for building. And also, you were talking about the box stove project in Lithuania, which took us 10 years to build, actually more than 10 years. The bureaucracy and the difficulty of going through the planning and all of these issues, and that was in a World Heritage Site, UNESCO protected World Heritage Site. So things were just taking a very, very long time. And we also wanted to use all local craftsmen, and this was in Vilnius, Lithuania. And the craftsmanship, when we started in 2008, wasn't there. And then it evolved. As the project was going on, suddenly we had people who could manufacture, and the whole industry evolved because the country itself was so young. Whereas in Guna, we were appointed in, I mean, it was ridiculous. We were appointed in January to start designing the building, and by September we had phase 1 completed. And that was, it was incredibly fast because planning was very minimal. It was one developer led area, and so planning was, very non-consequential. They owned the construction company, so again, we were sort of started at the beginning of the queue with the construction company because they owned the manufacturing. And then they set up a factory, a prefabrication factory right on site so that they could just erect. And so they built this structure in 120 days, which was extraordinary. And we have a video of it, which is amazing. But these are the possibilities that you can do in regions like yours, which in Europe would be unheard of. So what does it mean to be building in a place? I mean, if you're talking about housing, and I don't know whether when you're talking about a house of the future, whether you're talking about the individual house and how we're living as an individual, as a family, or if you're talking about housing, where, how do you create this notion of housing and the housing needs without necessarily doing, this sort of repetitive block in a garden,
I think you touched on a very important aspect. I think you can't look at it as a sole item, like a house. It has to be thought of as a complete fabric of neighborhood. I love what you said about in Barcelona, the modular system, one house will create in the garden. Is that all part of the module, or is the module just the house? Thinking that extreme, I think pushes the boundaries of where the line is. I think we should leave that for the contestants.
Yeah.
And I think
sorry, Andrew, you
Yeah, I was only going to add pretty much exactly the same. For what we might want to look at or expect to see. Cities. Christina, you mentioned or move the cars for parks. And, I personally love that concept. The creation of green space inside in a city, I think, it's not a new thing, but I think it's something that is wonderful to see the development of. I think the changes in Paris, for example, where they start to reduce the traffic and increase the cycling. Cycling, of course, being a big initiative in the UAE at the moment as well, in terms of connectivity and the push for outdoor exercise and this connectivity between life and work and home and the outdoors, I think is incredible. And what we see in Singapore for the small ecosystems and the ability to create green, I think again wonderful as well. So and that's, I think, very important for the UAE to the prospect of. And I know there are wonderful initiatives in the creation of green space and in the development of that, and the requirement, not just in the compliance for buildings, but also in the livelihood and the landscape. I think it's great. I think here you're making a great point, Christina. It is a different environment for building. I think there is definitely a speed. I think it's 2 or 3 times what it might be in Europe. And I fully accept that. I think one of the benefits in this region is the certainty of enablement. Something can get done. There is a process that starts and finishes with generally a positive outcome. And I think that does make a difference. I think that makes a huge difference for everybody that is involved, in the process of the creation of real estate. And for those that have the creative urge for design, then I think that's a great benchmark to have, to know that the enablement process is something that is going to get taken care of. I think is very important to allow that creative mind to get out there, and possibly, maybe that's part of this competition. Is my view on the mindset in the UAE is, show us the wow. We all know we're all talking about things for this particular competition that are probably not new, but we want to see the best of what might be on offer and develop, the things that are there, and all that's been talked about. It sounds hugely exciting.
I think if talk about different kind of trends, and we talked about modular urban living, and I think Christina also touched a bit on this as well. So advancements like 3D printing have revolutionized design, and it's been the topic and the trending topic, I would say, between not in only our industry and all the other industries as well. So since Dubai has officially licensed legal construction of 3D printed residential villas and buildings, how do you think architects are leveraging this technology to create spaces that cater to individual user needs? Do you see it that maybe we would start using it in like actual like villas, or do you see it, what's the potential you see in this aspect?
Well, I mean, this idea of 3D printing, and it's funny, we've been jumping from modular design to 3D printing, and I think they're actually completely opposite to each other. To me, modular design sounds like prefabricated, elements that you then assemble on site in a very quick manner, whereas 3D printing is a machine replacing the worker on site essentially, and pouring whatever material it ends up pouring. But if you think of 3D printing, I think it has changed our industry in more than one way, because you're talking about it in the building, the construction of the building. But if we start back in terms of how we design, and just the ability for us to 3D prototype already, and to 3D print within the office, which is available to any kind of office. You no longer have to be a big manufacturing company. And if you go to most schools nowadays, they have 3D printing facilities or laser cutting or things like that. So already the way we think about design and the way we think about creating spaces has completely changed. And if I look at the younger people in my office, the way they have been taught and the way they think about the design is so different from the way I was taught. And when I was at Columbia, we were the first year to have something called the paperless studio, which meant that actually you weren't drawing with a pencil, you were drawing with a computer, and that was, wow, you can do architecture without paper. And so that was, that was sort of a while back. And I think that this generation of architects, don't use paper anymore. It's all done in the computer, and the design thought process is already done in 3D on the computer. Now I have constantly this discussion with people in my office saying, you've got to switch from one to the other, and maybe I'm just old-fashioned that way. But the way we think about it means that any size of office is able to think in a complex manner, and it's no longer, the larger offices who have more resources who can sort of achieve that. And that's, I think, is an interesting thing, because it's opened up the subject. And what this also does is, Oscar Niemeyer famously said that architecture is for the rich, and he was right in that he meant that people who could afford architecture needed money, and therefore, you needed to hire an architect and a contractor, and you needed the time to do design, and so it wasn't sort of massive available to the masses. And what this 3D printing or 3D prototyping or the way we design is that it now sort of opens it up to everybody, and it gives you the opportunity to be able to do that in a cost-effective way, and to sort of create complex systems that are worked out on the computer and then delivered on site in a much more seamless manner. But as I was saying at the beginning, it's still at its infancy, and I can't wait to come and see the projects in the UAE that were 3D printed. But what this allows, I think, the 3D printing to do is, as I was saying, rather than mass fabrication, it's mass customization. And I think that's probably the most important thing, because it sort of allows you to move beyond the Lego set and allow you to do things at a larger scale that you would have before needed to revert to the more traditional methods of construction. So that's interesting. And also, when you look at within an office, the way we work together with consultants, with the advent of BIM, is also, we have been able to, we foresee all the problems in the office before they're on site, and that sort of allows, again, the speed of construction, the efficiency of construction. It means that it's more cost effective, it's more speedy, and therefore it sort of allows it to, again, be available to a wider range of people. So it's definitely something that is at its very beginning, and I think I find it actually much more interesting than AI. AI to me is just another tool of design, and everyone's talking about it. We're all going to be out of a job. I don't think so, but I think that this, you know, I'm so frustrated by the tools that are available for us in terms of construction versus the tools that are available for us in terms of design. And I think that that hopefully, if you know, if there is significant amount of money into research into how to deliver this, you know, and I think that Elon Musk has been starting to take on the construction industry more, like in solar panels and things like that. But if there was more innovation like that, and sort of more organization between countries, universities, etc., to sort of keep the innovation of construction going, I think we'd be moving in a very different way.
Great insight. Thank you. Andrew, do you have any feedback about the 3D printing? What is your point of view on that in terms of construction, and what possibilities do you see coming out of it?
Oh, you're muted.
Sorry about that. I think in respect of what's being said, it is early days. So I think we've got to look and see how it develops. It's incredibly useful, there's no doubt about it, and I think it has a cost-effective benefit. It has the ability to take unique pieces of design and make that into something for sure. What the long-term effect will be, I think we've just got to wait and see. I mean, there's only 3D printing sometimes to a certain size of component, so you know it has its natural drawbacks. But like all technological advances, it will come quickly. So I think it's an important part of where we are. Let's see what happens next. Useful.
Very useful. Touching on the last topic that we wanted to explore, like in terms of the trends and the AI and the 3D, we also kind of don't want to lose that culture aspect, cultural sensitivity in innovation. So in terms, it's very vital, even in the face of design innovation. So how do architects weave the threads of innovation concepts while respecting cultural and historical context of a space? Could you elaborate on like projects this has been done in to balance those two, and where the balance of culture and innovation was like joint?
Sorry, go on, Andrew.
I can just give you one quick example, actually, because it's you know, I know for sure when the UAE Pavilion Expo was considered, then you know the design conception was based upon the Falcon, so there was this integration between the culture and the history, and then the eventual design, which is modern and innovative. So there can be a connection. Personally, I believe is incredibly important. But I think it's probably incredibly important for all buildings. You know, I think to be able to contextualize a building to its use and its location, and to take the benefit of what the history may have been, you know, I think all these things together is what makes design such an incredible and unique experience. And that's what I'm interested, or what we're interested here is, you know, for this particular competition. So it can never be underemphasized. I think it's just a vital component, and you know, the way that designers are structured, they're able to see these things. I know a lot of and I'm sure Christina will agree, ideas that come up are always creative before they become scientific. And it's a supporting process of engineering that can assist the creative element. But I think looking after cultural and historic and heritage is vital. Not just here, but I think generally. I think that's what makes cities such a wonderful place to be.
I mean, I remember going as a student, I was working in Spain, and I went to El Escorial to listen to a lecture by Jim Sterling at the time. And somebody asked him in the audience, what is happening in England in terms of architecture? And he goes, nothing, it's just Prince Charles complaining about us modern architects ruining the cities. And it's, you know, it's here in the UK, it's been an ongoing debate for a while, and then we had the advent, the bad moment of postmodernism, and I think it's very much this idea of understanding traditions and looking at contextualism is hugely important, but it, you know, it also cannot go into the pastiche, because then it's sort of, there is an element of ridicule. So if we think about how to interact with countries or places, whether you're a foreigner or whether you're local, it comes to the same thing is how do you reinterpret, how do you be informed by where you build, while not necessarily trying to replicate something that is old. So if you think of globalization, where we were replicating the same buildings all over the world, and that just sort of, you know, it may have changed color because it's in a different country, but essentially the form, you know, the skyscraper going everywhere, etc. And that sort of is, I think, is a missed opportunity, and it's also sort of lacking of understanding of what local cultures, the local cultural needs may be. And so when we work, because we work abroad a lot, whenever I form a team, I think the culture of the team within the office is very important. So when I was working in Lithuania, I had Lithuanian architects working on our team, because I needed to understand the culture. I needed to understand the history. I needed to understand where they were coming from. They had, you know, this used to be a Soviet country since '91. It was a democracy where, you know, some of them speak Russians, but do they like it? Don't they like it? You know, all of these elements. How do they live? How do they heat their homes? All of these things was hugely important in terms of doing it. And so we ended up creating something that was, you know, in a Baroque complex, doing some contemporary interventions, but that were very much informed by the place and by the history of the place and by the architecture of the place. And there's no way that we could ever replicate this project anywhere else in the world, because it wouldn't make any sense. When we were doing the Guna concert hall, I was thinking, what does it mean to be doing a cultural building in Egypt? I mean, look at the precedents. They're so strong, right? And so how can you compete with the pyramids? How can you compete with Luxor? Or how can you equalize them? And how can you create something which is as impressive? And our view was not really to look at, you know, hieroglyphs or trying to replicate any of this, but to actually understand what the essence of it is and what makes Egyptian architecture. And we sort of came up with the idea that the art was a Moorish invention, and therefore this is a subject that would be interesting to work with, because we work with something that is a Moorish invention. And then the second thing is, what's so unique about Egyptian architecture was, ancient Egyptian architecture, was its scale. It's oversized sculptures, it's oversized columns. And so we wanted to play with the idea of scale. And it's not, you know, again, it's something that what we created played on these, and it's not screaming Egyptian architecture or any of it, but it's sort of really the ideas that were generated for the project were really driven by the context and the culture of the place. And for me, one of the great successes is when I was designing it and I had renderings, I showed it to an elderly Egyptian gentleman. He asked to see what I was doing in Egypt. So I showed it to him, and he asked me whether this was in Luxor. And I thought, I've nailed it, because it's sort of, to him, it was so familiar. And I don't think he really understood what he was looking at, but he recognized the cultural aspects of it. So I think it's you know, I think there is a huge responsibility, and I think sometimes I always wonder if, you know, should we be working here? Is it right? Are we the right people to be doing this? Why am I working in Saudi or in the UAE or in Lithuania or any of that? And it's just, I think as outsiders, you bring another aspect, and I think as long as you are, you bring a lack of understanding which forces you to think the process. And so therefore I think that with the collaborations that we do, and I really mean that seriously, I think that we have what we call the cultural attaches in the office, so the people who bring us the culture and the understanding, and we then work together and try to come up with something new. I mean, this is the only way I've understood how to do it. So yeah.
Thank you. I think I agree with you a lot because in terms of the competition itself, I think even culture sensitivity could, as you said, it's the way it's used, not necessarily like the literal sense. So you just get the idea, and as outsiders, you sometimes have to extremely study without the preconceptions that you already have, and then you just do from what you know. So it's actually, there's more research involved. So I agree with you. Like even if you have a view, I think it's important to go back and still research what the needs are in the region, and what to reference and what to keep in terms of culture, and then how to innovate.
And how you can build also,
Yeah.
how you can build without necessarily importing everything. And that's, it's interesting. We're doing a building in America, and I'm literally banging my head on the walls because you can't find glazing manufacturers. Everything is being imported from Europe. I mean, it's crazy if you think about it. Here we are in America, and it's cheaper to import from Europe than source locally. And it's really, it's a difficulty. It's just because I don't know what the history of that is. Manufacturing, I guess they, I still can't get my head around that. But this idea of what can you build and what can you build locally. When we were building in Zimbabwe, where you really don't have a construction industry because you had hyperinflation, you had a politically broken country, economically broken country. So how do you build something when the tools are really limited? And it was just interesting. We just came up with designs that, I saw the construction workers using rebars, welding rebars together to create ladders. And I was like, that's really interesting. They can't buy a ladder, so they'll fabricate their own ladder with the rebars on site. That's really interesting. So we started fabricating. We did the car canopy. We started weaving rebars together because there's a huge tradition of basket weaving in the country. We thought, okay, well, let's. So in a sense, you can learn, you can come up with these new ways of thinking or of building just by really understanding what is so important locally. And I think that's all part of innovation. It doesn't always have to be computerized. I think it's sort of, to me, innovation is so much driven by the place. And I think that, to me, the people who are going to live in your house, by definition, will have no understanding of architecture or no interest in architecture, right? I mean, we're a small community, we're interested, but they're not going to care what the theory of the design behind it is. They're going to think, can I cook? Can I clean? Does things going to fall apart? Does it look good? Do I feel right? Are the proportions right? Things like that. So there's some very pragmatic notions, and then there's also some very emotional notions that come into architecture. And I think that this understanding of it, and that's what I liked about this Barcelona mayor, is that she took, an engineering problem, which was the car in the city essentially polluting the city and causing gridlock, and sort of overlaid a very human aspect to it, saying, why are we designing the cities for cars? Why is it that in Dubai we are on motorways going from one place to the next all the time? And is there a way to actually weave this back together? And obviously you also have another challenge, is the heat. How do you create public outdoor spaces when you're absolutely overheated? So there's all these challenges that are are driven by you know, the contextual climate, and so I think that these elements, in that competition, I hope will become apparent that it's not a housing competition that could be anywhere globally, but actually it's something that really is driven by the needs, the local needs.
Andrew, do you have any final remarks? Because we have to close the session in a bit.
No, my only final remark is that's exactly correct. This is, you know, quite obviously about location. I think that is very important to the entries that come through. So we're very excited about seeing how the competition develops. Thank you.
So I'd like to thank all of you and the participation. It was a great discussion, and I love all the points you guys touched about making it very human, people-centric. I think that's the main driving force in the trend that we are trying to resolve. We're problem solvers at the end. So thanks for the engaging conversations, and we're all excited for this coming era, I would say. Abir, if you have any closing remarks, or the team from MBR.
Yeah, no, I think I would want to extend my heartfelt, I mean, gratitude to each one of you. Amazing points, mass customization, mass construction, things like that, unit versus the community we live in, maintenance, resources available on ground, construction, individual versus group. So I have a lot of notes here and there, the tools. So context, culture, end of the day, I think innovation comes, or the drive behind innovation is the actual need. What is the challenge? What is the actual need? And how might we explore solutions around that? Design for function. We just, you know, we don't innovate just for the, you know, for the fun of it. Fun is part of it. Playfulness, fun, creativity, but the need, the expectation, the individual versus the group need. So I think, thank you, Noura. Thank you, Christina. Thank you, Andrew, for being with us and, you know, opening more tabs to think about here at the Mohammed bin Rashid Center for Government Innovation with our partners. The competition is one of the tools to explore and find solutions. And I think all of you, major stakeholders in this ecosystem and influencers in architecture, in engineering, in design, in behavior. Thank you again.
Thank you very much for inviting us.
Thank you very much. A pleasure.
Have a good day. Bye, everybody.